What if the moment your family disowned you was also the moment they unknowingly handed you the leverage to take everything back years later? My father didn't hesitate. He didn't ask a question. He didn't lower his voice. He just looked at me, pregnant, barely 18, and said, "You're a liability to this family." Then he pointed to the door. I remember noticing strange details in that moment. The scrape of silverware against porcelain, the ticking clock on the wall, the way no one else at the table looked up. No one asked if I was okay. No one asked who the father was. No one asked where I would go. That's when it hit me. They weren't shocked. They were relieved. My pregnancy wasn't the problem. It was the excuse. Before I stood up, I reached under my chair and placed a small box on the table. Inside were documents I didn't fully understand yet, but I would. Notices, loan statements, papers with my name signed in ink I didn't recognize, and amounts that didn't belong to an 18-year-old. I didn't explain them. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just walked out into the snow. What they never understood was this. Leaving wasn't surrender. It was distance. Months earlier, my father had asked me to help with paperwork. He said it was temporary. He said it was for experience. I trusted him. I didn't know I had signed my name onto obligations designed to fail long before the ink dried. I learned the truth 3 months later. 6 months pregnant, I stood in a leasing office holding deposit money I'd saved for weeks. The woman behind the desk stared at her screen, then looked at me with something close to pity. "I'm sorry," she said. "We can't rent to you." She didn't explain. She didn't need to. That night I slept in my car. And if you're still watching, understand this isn't a story about being cast out. It's about what happens when someone they underestimated stops playing defense. Subscribe, because the rebuild is where everything changes. I promised my unborn child something in that car, hands shaking on the steering wheel. This wouldn't end with survival. It would end with ownership. 7 years later, standing in a glass office overlooking the financial district, I finally understood something my father never did. Patience doesn't fade. It compounds. People like to imagine revenge as loud. Arguments, accusations, final speeches that feel satisfying for about 10 seconds and solve nothing. That's not how real damage happens. The first year after I left wasn't about healing. It was about alignment. I aligned my life around one rule. Nothing that couldn't survive pressure deserved my time. Jobs, friendships, decisions. If it cracked under stress, I walked away. I worked whatever paid consistently. Late shifts, holidays, weekends. Not because I liked it, because predictability creates leverage. Passion is optional. Cash flow is not. While other people vented, I documented. While they explained, I recorded. While they hoped, I tracked. The notices kept coming. My name, my credit. Debts I hadn't created but was legally tied to. Most people would have panicked. Panic scatters energy. I organized it instead. Dates, amounts, lenders, patterns. That's when something clicked. This wasn't chaos, it was repetition. My father didn't make one bad decision, he made the same one over and over. Overextend. Delay, refinance, blame timing. Count on reputation to buy another year. Once you see the pattern, emotion becomes irrelevant. That's when I stopped thinking like a daughter. I started thinking like a creditor. Not in theory, in consequence. Because a creditor doesn't argue. They don't confront. They don't need permission. They wait for math to finish the conversation. I learned how debt actually behaves over time, how interest compounds quietly, how defaults don't announce themselves, how banks tolerate bad behavior until it threatens their reporting cycle. I learned what institutions forgive and what they never forget. By the time my daughter was old enough to talk, I knew something my father didn't. He wasn't stable. He was floating. From the outside, he looked untouchable. Stories, handshakes, smiles. Inside, everything depended on tomorrow fixing today. That's not strength. That's exposure. I didn't need him to fail. I needed him to continue. Every project he stretched, every loan he rolled, every obligation he postponed. Each one widened the same invisible crack. And when I finally ran the numbers years later, it confirmed what I already knew. He wasn't powerful. He was standing on a fault line, and he had no idea someone else was mapping it. What he never understood is that leverage doesn't require confrontation. Power doesn't announce itself when it arrives. It shows up as paperwork. By the time I made my first move, I didn't feel angry anymore. Anger rushes. I needed precision. I wasn't watching my father anymore. I was watching the people who were tired of him. Banks don't care about reputation. They care about numbers that don't reconcile and borrowers who always need just a little more time. He had become one of those borrowers. 3 loans, different projects, different lenders, same excuse. I didn't call as a daughter. I didn't even call as myself. I called as a solution. I asked simple questions. What was overdue? What was unlikely to be recovered? What they were prepared to move off their books before quarter end? They didn't resist. They were relieved. Bad debt is embarrassing. Someone offering to take it quietly is a gift. I didn't negotiate emotionally. I negotiated mathematically. Discounted value, immediate transfer, no publicity. By the end of that week, the documents were signed. Nothing dramatic happened. No phone call, no warning. But something fundamental had changed. For the first time in his life, my father owed money to someone who didn't care about his stories and wouldn't wait for his excuses. I wasn't chasing him. I was holding the paper. That's the part people misunderstand about revenge like this. The win isn't when they fall apart. The win is when they wake up one morning and realize their options are gone and they can't figure out why. He thought the pressure was the economy. He thought the banks were tightening. He never once thought to ask who had stepped in, and I didn't need him to, because the moment I acquired that debt, the relationship inverted. He wasn't my past anymore. He was an account. What he didn't know was that buying the debt was the easy part. Pressure doesn't arrive all at once. It narrows. Once the debt changed hands, I didn't accelerate anything. Acceleration looks aggressive. Aggression invites attention. I did the opposite. I enforced the terms exactly as written. No favors. No extensions. No courtesy calls, just deadlines. Construction companies don't collapse from one big failure. They fail from timing errors. Payroll on Fridays. Materials on 30-day cycles. Permits that expire if one form arrives late. Miss one window and everything downstream starts to wobble. I let the clock do the work. The first sign wasn't dramatic. One Friday, payroll cleared late. Not missed, just delayed. Enough for supervisors to notice. Enough for questions to start. Invoices that used to get rolled were now acknowledged and answered with policy. Requests for flexibility came back as written responses citing clauses instead of opinions. Nothing illegal, nothing personal, just compliance. Secondary effects followed. Vendors stopped delivering without cash up front. An insurer requested updated disclosures before renewing coverage. A regional bank flagged a covenant review and shortened the response window. Each issue was small. Together, they formed a funnel. My father did what he always did. He tried to refinance. He pushed for a bridge loan, short-term, higher interest, meant to buy breathing room. The bank didn't reject him outright. They offered conditional approval, pending updated cash flow statements and collateral verification. He missed the documentation deadline by 3 days. The offer expired. From there, the margin thinned fast. A delayed payment forced a rushed decision. A rushed decision raised costs. Higher costs meant more borrowing. More borrowing triggered tighter scrutiny. The system closed in without raising its voice. I didn't need to intervene. I didn't need to threaten. I didn't need to watch closely anymore. Once pressure is applied evenly, it sustains itself. Eventually, he did what predictable people always do when exits disappear. He asked for relief, not solutions. Relief. And when he finally reached out, requesting a meeting, a restructuring, a pause, he still believed he was negotiating with a faceless system. He didn't know who was holding the calendar, but he was about to. What he believed was a negotiation was actually a request. Finale, reveal, not explanation. He asked for the meeting on a Tuesday. Not urgently, not angrily, carefully. He used the same language he always had: collaborative, professional, optimistic. He framed it as a reset, a chance to realign, a temporary pause while things settled. He still believed someone somewhere could make time bend. The meeting room was neutral, glass walls, no names on the door. The kind of place designed to make people feel equal. He sat first. He talked about headwinds, about timing, about how solid companies sometimes hit rough patches. He explained how a short restructuring window would stabilize everything. I let him finish. Then I slid one document across the table. No speech, no accusation, just paper. He skimmed it quickly at first, then slower. His posture changed. Not panic, recognition. The document wasn't aggressive. It didn't threaten. It simply reflected reality as it now existed. Dates, missed windows, expired terms, clauses already triggered by his own delays. The clock he thought he was negotiating with had already run out. That's when he finally asked the only question that mattered. "Who are you?" I told him, not dramatically, not loudly, just my name. He didn't argue after that. He didn't shout. He didn't try to justify himself. He just sat there, staring at the paper, replaying the last 7 years in reverse. Every assumption, every delay, every moment he thought tomorrow would save him. There was no victory speech. Because domination doesn't need one, I didn't take everything. I took what the contracts allowed. I enforced what the calendar made unavoidable. When the meeting ended, he stood slowly, smaller than I remembered. No anger left, just comprehension. He finally understood the truth. I hadn't come back for forgiveness. I hadn't come back for closure. I came back because time, once owned, doesn't give anything back, and I own the clock. If you want more stories like this, you can subscribe.